Memory is subjective. Truth is interpreted. Art is dramatized and distilled impressions. Narrators are unreliable. Words and silence can both be violent. People are more nuanced than opinions. Rhetoric is a craft. Trauma is inherited. Stories are sacred. Pattern recognition. Maybe prophets are just autistic people with pattern recognition, a strong sense of justice, an intolerance for the inauthentic, and the stubborn refusal to look away from unpleasant truths. Unpleasant truths like fascism isn't binary. A society isn't fascist or not fascist. Neither is a person. Fear and anger spread like weeds through the garden of the human heart, strangling all reason. Gradual, relentless, like canyons carved by great rivers, empathy erodes. Fascism does not begin with mass deportations or death camps. It begins the same way it spreads, with what we tolerate, what we allow in our presence unchallenged to keep the peace. I remember watching the Tea Party march through the streets of my hometown, flying the stars and bars beside their yellow snake banner. Don't worry about them, everyone scoffed. They're a radical fringe group. No one will take them seriously. They'll make conservatives look bad without ever getting their hands on real power. I remember the pit that opened in my stomach the afternoon Roe v. Wade was overturned. I messaged a colleague, wait, are we really supposed to keep on doing our little spreadsheets and emails when we just lost our right to bodily autonomy? Yup, came her reply. It's rude to bring up politics at work. I remember when the Patriot Act passed as a temporary sacrifice of privacy for security. I remember chanting, USA, 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 with the other children as our school bus passed a neighbor's house with a sign out front that said bomb all towel heads. I remember students, friends, and neighbors deploying to places I couldn't point to on a map for reasons none of us could articulate beyond national security. They came home shell-shocked, when they came home at all, and told us that it wasn't what we thought. I remember reading the congressional report on torture at Guantanamo Bay, a concentration camp that remains operational today. Our forced labor camp network already exists in our private, for-profit prison pipeline. I remember knocking doors for the 2020 census, trying to count as many poor neighborhoods as possible so they wouldn't lose funding, while MAGA tried to shut us down early for not asking people their immigration status. Some families saw my bag and my badge and thought I was with ICE. They turned off their lights and hid from me. Their neighbors tried to report them to me. I remember being chased off by guard dogs and shotguns for knocking on the doors of homes flying MAGA flags. Fascism doesn't just suddenly happen to a society. It is a steep, slippery slope from patriotism to nationalism to fascism. Don't believe anyone who tells you it could never happen here. It begins as a call for unity, for civility and fairness. I have a right to my beliefs, they insist, and a right to express my beliefs. You have to respect that. Be reasonable. When they say be reasonable, they mean don't cause a scene. It begins as a sermon about tolerance and nonviolence in the face of bigotry. Be open-minded, they entreat. You have to understand both sides. We can agree to disagree and still respect each other. They mean they expect the respect paid by a lesser to authority. Just compromise, they suggest. They mean sacrifice your dignity for my comfort. Why do you have to make everything so political, they grumble, as though they haven't politicized and even criminalized my very existence. What they really mean is, why do you have to remind me the price others pay for my privilege? Dyke, bitch! The shout came from the open window of a passing pickup truck flying the stars and stripes, with the middle stripe turned blue. I was walking home from the pharmacy when the slurs hit me. Before I had time to react, I saw a cop car up ahead. The officer had his window down, too. He was hassling an unhoused neighbor in a wheelchair, so I stopped in the middle of the crosswalk, pulled out my phone, and started recording. "You can't block the sidewalk," the cop taunted. "Keep moving. That parking lot is private property. Get out of the street." When my neighbor asked where he was allowed to exist, the cop's voice got harder. "Not my problem, but if you don't figure it out, I'm taking you to jail." Just then, he saw me with my phone pointed at him, and he drove off. I shook my head at my neighbor as I walked past him. "Man, fuck the police," I said. "Got any spare change?" he answered. I have lived in a few heavily policed neighborhoods. I can hear the difference between gunshots, fireworks, and a backfiring car. I have walked my dog past playground benches where my addicted neighbors shoot up. I've learned where residents of the tent city under the interstate overpass panhandle after cops clear out their encampment every few weeks. I remember jumping over the median of that highway and blocking traffic when George Floyd was murdered by the police. On the march there, I heard store windows breaking and saw traffic cameras torn down. A young black man holding an aluminum baseball bat with "I can't breathe" scrawled in thick marker climbed onto the roof of a police cruiser and shattered the windshield, then the courthouse sign. In each hand he held up the words "justice" and "peace" to the crowd gathered round him. An older black man directing the march with a cowbell talked him into climbing down and moving on before a riot broke out. "We not stopping here," he repeated to his younger self, his voice hoarse and exhausted and heartbroken from generations of justice deferred. Not long after we made our way up the exit ramp and over the median to block highway traffic in both directions, we found ourselves surrounded by cops decked out in full riot gear and carrying long rifles. Elders disbanded the march, but I heard youth grumbling. "It's not enough. We'll do it right when the sun go down." I remember the morning a SWAT team with large dogs broke down my neighbor's door to arrest him for stealing a car. I remember the afternoon police surrounded my neighbor's house with guns drawn to make a drug-related arrest. They blocked off the whole intersection and used my front stoop as a staging ground for their military-grade equipment, while I recorded them from my porch until my neighbor came out with his hands in the air. I remember the evening shots rang out from a child's birthday party up the street. Parents scattered, babies in their arms, screaming that someone had died. In that moment, they were most afraid of being there when the police arrived. I remember the night another black man was pulled over on my block. The cop decided he wasn't complying fast enough, pulled him out of the vehicle, and maced him in the street. I remember the undercover officers who infiltrated later protests. We always clocked each other right away and started heckling. "I see you," I gestured. He answered with a cold smirk that relished the potential violence between us. I remember how righteous outrage became outraged self-righteousness in the name of ideological purity. I remember disrupting the expectant silence of meeting for worship to testify that without justice there can be no peace. Friends should not break bread with fascists at tables Jesus would have flipped. There is no common ground to find with fascists because they will take 2 steps back for every step you take in their direction, then keep tempting you to compromise. I will not turn the other cheek to those who promised a cheering crowd on live TV that people like me will be eradicated from public life. A trans teenager once told me that Republicans want her to kill herself so they don't have to pay to do it themselves. I will not teach her to respect the beliefs of those invested in making sure she never grows up. It's only because I cannot unsee a fascist's humanity, despite their refusal to see mine. It's only because I want to hold on to my own humanity that I don't try to kill them back. That is my peace testimony, friends. I answer that of God in fascists by refusing to hate them. Nevertheless, they must be stopped by any means necessary.